I'm Catherine Mizo, and with Annabeth Bergman, we're the co-conveners for the Performing Arts section. And we are so pleased today to have this incredible panel. And I just want to say, originally, it was put together by Kosuge Hayato. And unfortunately, he can't be here, but he has a very long history of working with both contemporary historical Butoh now, and is very deeply involved in this project. So, and also I believe his email is on the on our site, on the Nomadic site. So if you want to get in touch with him or any of the performers, because I would really love all of these projects that we're doing together, that they expand and grow. I'm at the University of California, and my particular focus is on the body and movement and dance, and was a long time sort of practitioner of Butoh by women. And I'm particularly interested now in contemporary performance, both popular culture and also the idea of the militarization of performance across East Asia. Anna.
Yes, warm welcome also from my side. I think I don't have to repeat all these we said all the time, but I'm teaching at Tokyo University right now. I'm focusing on traditional Japanese theater, mainly kabuki and kabuki production and the history of production, as well as stage scenery. Yeah, so let's get going. Catherine.
Okay, we will have 3 papers, all one right after the other, and then we'll have a full discussion at the end. And if you would like to, if you don't want to show yourself, you can put your questions in chat, or it's lovely when you wave your hand and open your screen and join us in a lively manner. So our first paper, Butoh-s in color, cinematically speaking, is Katja and she's now based at Ca' Foscari, University of Venice. She's an associate professor in the Department of Asian and North African Studies, and her areas of research: bodies in Japanese performing arts with a focus on Butoh and contemporary dance, corporeality, writing and performativity, dance and politics. And the title of her paper, Quicksilvering the Naked Body Against Power, Transcorporealities from Kuronuri Niira to Ginuri. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm really happy to be with you and with my colleagues here in the panel. Sharing here now. Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint now?
It's perfect. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
If you want to go to you, yeah, that's right. Cool.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, since the groundbreaking performance Kinjiki, or forbidden colors, the practice of applying colors on the naked body or parts of it has become a distinctive feature of Butoh. Hijikata Tatsumi, wearing only a pair of black trousers, appeared in the dark with his black painted skin. And his criminal and erotic presence was enhanced by the kuronori, the practice prevailing in his earlier years, when Hijikata tended to darken his skin with black grease paint mixed with olive oil. He defined kuronori as relentless ardor. As highlighted also by Arimitsu Michio, kuronori reflects the influences of Afro-American culture, jazz dance and music, for example, also Catherine Dunham's Afro-Caribbean dance. We will see later with Murobushi Ko's dance that kuronori has wider implications than the exploration of eroticism or political concerns with racism, social minorities, all issues that are structurally integrated in Hijikata's political dance, addressing discriminated bodies, aged bodies, ill bodies, disabled bodies, and so on. The non-human aspect, notably the centrality of Hinin outcast in Hijikata's choreo politics points to a serious criticism by denouncing the treatment of non-socially contoured members in Japan's society, which imposes invisibility on them. Operations of resisting national discourse and the myth of the homogeneity of the Japanese people have been explicitly addressed in works referring to cultural and political minorities, which involved Hijikata's participation, such as Hanji-kik and Nigro Tokawa. Hijikata's Nikutai rebels against nationalism and the Kokutai, the nation-state corporeality centered on the emperor. Hence, the Nikutai in Hijikata's Butoh is a critical body, a body of critique and crisis, displacing systems of knowledge. Before approaching the various practices of chromatization, I would like to underline that applying color is applying matter. Hence, this device goes beyond the visual effect or image composition. It rather enforces processes that take place in the movement or stillness making of the performer, pointing to the quality of performance. It should not be seen as a semantic layering, but as a corporeal condition. And these aesthetic strategies should be understood as facilitating the heteromorphic process of the transcorporeality actualized in Butoh. Furthermore, Butoh originates from the ankoku, the absence of light, where colors do not shine. It is important to emphasize that for Hijikata, also nakedness is a costume. I argued that Hijikata's experimentations embrace the different stages of biological death. Pallor mortis, for instance, is reflected in Shironuri, implemented especially after Anma, and adopted increasingly during the 70s, when Butoh's radically corporealized acts of resistance underwent a process of theatricalization and aestheticization, and connections to Minzoku Geino and Kabuki were manifested. Compared to the black paint, Shironuri shifts towards algidity or the process of algor mortis, and enhances the condition of ambiguity. It leads to a deferment of aesthetics itself, approaching the undefinable, the condition of which is the undefinable, which is the essence of the corruptible Nikutai. The white naked bodies are projected into a refracted and distorted eroticism. On one hand, the applied color suffocates nakedness. On the other, it empowers the erotic expression by deviating it. Putrefaction and decomposition are usual aesthetic aspects displayed in Butoh and are articulated also in relation to movement. The white makeup mixed with glue hanging from the performer's body, like shreds, may address the dirty and decaying body. It appears as aesthetics of visual disturbance, and therefore their nakedness does not necessarily titillate the audience's sexual desire. On the other side, due to their queerness, the dancer may appear more desirable. There is a connection to the aesthetics of eroguro nonsense. The Shironuri may disguise the performer's age. It creates a peculiar play of shadow and brightness, visibility and non-visibility, and interacts with the stage lights. An important effect is that this makeup erases the identity, gender, and social status of the performer and appears as a strong expedient of pulverizing residues of subjectivity. It disengages the performer from his human identity while leveling the difference between the human anatomy and the surrounding space, landscape, or crafted objects, facilitating the heteromorphic process. The dancer moves between the appearance and disappearance of existence, presence and absence on stage, between this and the other world, which are undistinguished. Skeletonization is manifested as well. The white bones and the skeleton of the dancer are emphasized in performative dynamics. I have to jump now this part, but let me only say that Gunji Masakatsu widely discusses the Shironori in Hijikata in connection with Minzoku Geino and in connection to the Shiraku, the white children in Misemono spectacles, performing in Misemono spectacles. And I would like to emphasize that he writes that since ancient times, whiteness has been associated with the bleached white bones of the corpse, and that un attimo, okay, and that the white powder the performer are encrusted with cools down and provokes sleep poisoning. This is important. Therefore, this makeup is associated with death ever since its use in Japanese classical dance. Uno Yoshito briefly suggests that Shironori is more an operation of erasing rather than applying something. In respect to the no mask, it leaves space of freedom to the performer to transform in whatever she or he wants. And it covers the immaturity and technical imperfections of the amateur Butoh dancers. Or it creates an interstice between fiction and reality. Placing protest has been a central concern for Hijikata in his unique exploration of corporealities, working against mechanisms of capitalism, state power, and surveillance. Morobushi is a significant aya of Hijikata's revolution and explored the political quality intrinsic to his anti-dance, considered as, and today this is a very difficult word, considered as terrorism, guerrilla against the establishment. In striking contrast to Hijikata, Morobushi clearly expresses counter-discourses of anti-nationalism and anti-imperialism and explicitly refers to Nietzsche, Bataille, Artaud, Blanchot, Foucault, Deleuze. He refers also to the liminal sphere of Yamabushi mountain ascetics endowed with transformational power and the Shugendo practices, including the self-mummified anchorage defined as Miira or Soku Shinbutsu. And here I would like to underline that Hijikata radically displaces knowledge, whereas Morobushi leans on philosophical systems. This is also important. Morobushi's centrifugal attitude pushed him to experiment continuously new ways of challenging his own body, drawing on Foucault's speculation on the outside, which is refracted by Morobushi's corporeal experience of the Hinagata, I will explain later, and the trans-border character in nomadic performativity. In 1972, he co-founded Dairo Kodakan, whose characteristic was and still is a cross-aesthetics between Butoh and Angora, mixed with spectacular and eye-catching gold dust cabaret, being close to a barockish elaboration and reminding of a distortion of the Aragoto aesthetics in Kabuki. In parallel to the sensational and extravagant Butoh works, Butoh works. They staged also kimbun cabaret shows in nightclubs and other places for earning their living. In 1972, Morobushi started to direct Ariadone no Kai, and in 1976, he founded his all-male group, Butoh-ha Sebi. Okay, there is something, no, this is, okay. Sorry. In Como saw the first performance of the Miira, Morobushi constrained himself into a coffin where a fire was kindled. He then faced the audience sitting in front of the open box in a fetus lotus-like position. His fetus lotus-like position. His mouth is wide open in a dilated mute scream and of terror or laughter, while his feet are in a contrived en dedans inward position. His black painted shaven head and his naked stiffened body is covered with gray ashes and smeared with mud and different materials hanging from his carbonized corpse like epidermal shreds in a desquamation process. The corpse of the Miira, destabilizing and disruptive figures incarnating the apogee of hybridity, presents an extreme challenge to borders of physicality and is the apex of contradiction, shivering between presence and absence in performativity, while pointing to the highest form of self-sacrifice. These preserved corpses, the ultimate objectification of the body, denote oscillations between human and thing, and embody to the nth degree that, as Murobushi writes, our body is the first other and the first alien thing we confront, and that dancing is being outside from the myth of identity. In relation to the performative self-entombment, crucial is the combination of Lotus Cabaret and Hinagata. I would translate Hinagata, which is a poetical shift of Murobushi, shapes of eternal darkness or stratification of multidimensional darkness. The connection between darkness, humor, and eroticism between Butoh and Cabaret is displayed also by the epithet Ankoku Takarazuka, used for his Ariadones production, a sort of grotesque deformation of the Takarazuka female troupe. Lotus Cabaret was not a pure entertainment, but a place of artistic experimentation where the group members risked their life. His Hinagata series explores physically and intellectually the eternal darkness experienced in an ignited coffin, the economy and the states of the body in a lightless burial chamber where the senses may be overturned. In 1978, Murobushi, Carlo Takeda, and Yoshioka Yumiko staged La Dernière Eden in Paris, which put Butoh firmly on the map in Europe, and where Murobushi appeared as a cross-dressed Miira. Since then, Murobushi contributed to that stereotyped image he later drastically opposed. The Miira corpse with its burnt skin dropping from the body might be easily confused with the images of the cadavers left after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to an immediate confrontation by the European audience. Murobushi's new international identity was fostered by the more aesthetically polished and elaborated work Zarathustra. Ariadones' half-naked and white-painted bodies, emphasizing slow motion, are vessels wherein the memory of the past transforms into the memory of the future. Zarathustra demonstrates that Murobushi's choreography for women engendered highly suggestive, bewitching beauty, although grotesque, while he was lost inside a labyrinth of love, intellectual cognition, and madness. The apotheosis of Murobushi's political body, placed outside its outrageousness and insurrection, took on a more concrete shape since the end of the 1990s, when he concentrated on solo production as Quicksilver and Crypt and so on. Murobushi started again to perform in his home country, while constantly traveling for his outside overseas tours. At this stage of high distillation, we see the exacerbated of his negation of art. He distanced himself from love, ecstasy, and trance, and did not show any interest in displaying a personal history or inner landscapes. The accent was laid on the political rapport and the critical distance between the dancer, his body, and the spectatorship. In this latter phase, the elaborated makeup of his Kuronuri Miira is definitely raised, and he usually appears half-naked and occasionally silver-painted. He sometimes wears only a pair of trousers or in only a suit, appears only in a suit, which is normally beige or black. He uses only beige or black colors, which he normally takes off on stage. But never, Murobushi never appears completely naked. This is important also. His dance inscribed into a non-human theater focuses more on non-emotional corporealities, crossing the edge between the organic and inorganic. In Quicksilver, dance and identity develops distinctly as intoxication, experience of contagion and freedom, very actual. Murabushi's toxic silver body is the thermometer measuring the audience's attention and tension. Practices of self-intoxication, which prevent the body from corrosion, are typical in the Miira procedure. But whereas the anchorites intoxicate themselves by ingestion of, for example, Japanlac sap or water rich in arsenic, Murabushi, by applying the silver paint using common acrylic color, provokes his self-intoxication from the outside. Murabushi chooses the Ginnuri, silver paint practice, envisaging a corporeal identification with the extremely volatile and toxic mercury called in Japanese suigin. Mercury is a poor conductor of heat and a fair conductor of electricity, and the only metal which reaches the liquid state and dissolves other metals as gold and silver. It is the symbol of speed and mobility. The first matter embracing androgyny and gender fluidity in alchemy and the cinnabar. Mercury is also an important element in Shugendo practices. Murabushi told me that he chose Ginnuri in relation to silverness, weakness, and the moon because it opposes Kimpun related to gold and power symbolized by the sun. In their treatise on nomadology, Deleuze and Guattari discuss the transhuman, the itinerant, the migrant, smooth spaces, and the metallic essence intrinsic to the flow of matter, the machinic phylum, in relation to its transformational character. And the words seem perfectly actualized in Murabushi's performance and corporeality. I read only the first part. Matter and form have never seemed more rigid than in metallurgy, yet the succession of forms tends to be replaced by the form of a contiguous development, and the variability of matters tends to be replaced by matter of a continuous variation. Murabushi writes about Quicksilver. It is both a venom and a medicine, which are made useless today. It is the Quicksilver, suigin, Mercury, Mercurius, but this is also our lost body, Shintai. In my body technique, there is something like stiffening muscles, bones, skin, dismantling them into pieces or making them relax all at once in the moment. I stiffened my entire body to the utmost limit, letting the cutaneous sensation divided into inside and outside reverse on itself and flow back as a Möbius strip band. But you do not know it until you do not take a lethal dose of the poison and the absolute speed. The eternity of only one chance, and this is very in relation to what we said during the panel of Peter Eckersall and the others. With evidence in Murabushi's Theatrum Chemicum, as I call it, of his later years, we encounter an exasperation of restlessness represented by his capacity of kinetic speed and fluidity, comparable to Mercury, rubbing against the immobility achieved in his stone-hard metal body in order to approach the impossibility of movement, typical of the cadaver and displayed in a context where his transformational identities are in a fight among each other. Only a little bit more. His extraordinary falling technique, Ta-o-reru, collapses and abrupt precipitations contain his concept of zero speed. His masterly shivering, Keiren, the Jesus, or as I call it, the seismic body, displaces and places the dancing body outside fiction and is for Murabushi the evidence of our lacerated body. His extremely detailed dynamics and anti-dynamics manifest an extensive multiplicity and intriguing outcome based on contradictions. Repetition, in contrast to repertory, unfolds in its pervasive plurality, while his body voices the process of devenir contemplated by Guattari and Deleuze. His elevated vertical jumps fly out of crevices of ontology, while he emits lacerating primal screams, hailing out of the cracks of his conflictive body, which provoke cracks in the audience, while lacerating their bodies. For Murobushi, these crevices are provoked by Keiden, the shivering of the body. And I read them, Keiden, as a strive against the state of surveillance. I will explain this later, maybe. Murobushi stops the dance before dancing. He establishes abrupt interruptions which disrupt the dramaturgy and fictiveness. For Murobushi, the spasmodic contractions combining the antinomy of tension and release are the only strategy of resistance. At the same time, there are the shame of our non-resistance and the failure of resistance. In respect to Mercury and Keiden, I'm finished. In respect to Mercury and Keiden, in Murobushi's stance as a political denouncement, I would like to suggest appunto, in respect to Mercury and Keiden, I would like to suggest that in Murobushi's stance, we can see a political denouncement addressing the epidemic of Minamata disease, the neurological syndrome provoked by methylmercury poisoning, implying dysfunctions of the nervous system. In conclusion, Murobushi developed stance as an intervention by means of his own body against his own body, integrated into the system. And his act of terrorism is between his body and his body, between his impossible identities, between his Nikutai and his Shintai, in combat with his corporeality and identity. He ignites his body while igniting dance. Thank you. I'm sorry if I talk too much.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Sorry.
Perfectly in our time.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Katja. Next, we have Miyagawa Mariko, and she's right. Is that correct? I have her a second. Yeah. Okay, and we have, she's at Tokyo Metropolitan University as a lecturer, and the title of her presentation is Representation of Black or Kokujin in Post-War Japanese Dance. I'm so pleased you're here, Miyagawa-san. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for introducing me. I share my slide. Can you see the slide? Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I start my presentation, and the title is Representation of Black or Kokujin in Post-War Japanese Dance. And here is the content. First, I talk to you an outline and point an attention to the term Kokujin. Chapter 1 will give the number of pieces before and after World War II and their short introductions. And Chapter 2 is a short description of the background. In Chapter 3, we investigate how the Japanese represented Black people. And last, there will be a brief conclusion. My central research is about Butoh, and this presentation investigates the context of the emergence of Butoh by focusing on the representation of Black. Since the latter half of the 1970s, Butoh has spread widely to the outside of Japan, and one of its typical images is the white color shironuri. However, in Hijikata Tatsumi's dance piece Kinjiki in 1959, thought of as the first Butoh performance, he painted his body black to represent the male character from Jean Genet's novel. So Butoh started with black rather than white. Arimitsu Michio argues this blackness and demonstrates how Afro-diasporic culture played a significant role in Butoh's early history. However, it was not only Hijikata who performed black in this period. After World War II, Japanese dancers picked up the subject concerning to Black people and performed some representation of Blackness in various ways, especially in the period from 1950s to the 1970s. In total, there are more than 70 pieces that represented Black. What does this phenomenon tell us about the situation of after World War II? So this presentation investigates how Japanese dancers have represented Black in their performances and analyzes their meanings, their ambivalent feelings toward Kokujin, and the influence of American diplomacy in post-war period. And I would like to remind you of something to keep in mind when using the term Kokujin. We cannot deny that this term itself has a discriminatory connotation, and now the other terms are preferred, like Afro-American. But the term was used in the day in question, and my research will not only focus on Afro-Americans, but also various imaginations under the term. In addition, we can identify the prejudice toward Black people from Japanese people with this term. So we examine the dance performance, focusing on this term. Also, the term Negro is used, but only in the original titles or in citations. First, we count the number of pieces. We include not only those performances which mainly focused on Kokujin, but also on those have only some parts. Before World War II, there are about 10 dance pieces, like a couple of Negroes by Eguchi Takaya and Miya Misako, Danza Negra by Ishii Baku. Foreign dancers who visited Japan also performed on the subject, for example, in Negro dance, Goryok's cakewalk, and chanson negre. In contrast, there are about 70 pieces after World War II. Some pieces have their originals, like Porgy and Bess, Petrushka, The First Emperor, Itsubari no O, based on the Emperor Jones by Eugene O'Neill. In the 1960s, there was a tendency for dance performances to be linked to the jazz boom, especially describes the agony of Black people. For example, Kimura Yuriko performed Sixpence Song that she danced with a record of the same title. Horiuchi-kan thematized the Cuban Revolution in Black, Brown, and Gray Brown in 1961 using the music of Charles Mingus. There were also performances that used the African instruments like bongos and Afro-Cuban music, etc. Some pieces reflect the peculiar problem in Japan after the war. The piece deals with children of mixed parentage, especially between Japanese women and Black men. Fukaya Yoshiya and Fuji Mieko's White, Black, Yellow, and Rose focused on this theme and was performed simultaneously in two ways via the abstraction and concrete expression methods. There is also a text by Eguchi Hiroshi for a new creation of ballet in Kanagawa entitled A Black Pastoral, whose main character was a half-blood boy. Josephine Baker, who came to Japan in 1954, organized a charity show for the relief of the children of mixed parentage. So this problem was a central concern of Japanese people in this era, and here we can also see the prejudice or racial discrimination towards the Black people by Japanese people. In the latter half of the 60s, echoing the civil rights movement in the United States, Japanese dancers expressed the sympathy for the Black people in their performances. Soon we will examine these pieces in detail and make clear how Japanese dancers represented Black people. But before that, I would like to talk of the background. There are two topics strongly related to the phenomenon. Of course, we can identify the US occupation and the US cultural diplomacy. Here, we focus on the performers who visited to Japan and the activity of the American Cultural Center. The first Black artist who came to post-war Japan was Josephine Baker, but her recital was mainly composed of songs, not a dance. Mas Graham, a representative of American modern dance, traveled to Japan in 1955 This time, there were African American dancers. The aim of this dispatch was to portray an American image that artists from any race can play an active part. There was also the purpose of bringing Japan culturally closer to the Western side during the Cold War. The first all-black group was Jean Leon Destiny's Haiti Carib Dance Company. Here, Destiny showed the powerful and strong dances like slave dance and voodoo. The critics described his dance such as primitive, 原始的, sauvage, 野蛮, black itself, 黒人そのもの, an energetic expression of life, 生命の躍動, and with a good sense of rhythm by nature, 生まれながらのリズム感. Catherine Dunham had also had a huge impact on Japanese dancers and critics. The visit of Alvin Ailey and Carmen de la Ballade in 1962 was also impressive. These were rare chances to experience Black culture directly. But we can see in the discourse over these dancers terms such as primitive, wild, originally Black, a good sense of rhythm, etc. These cliches also influenced to the critical words and the evaluation bias when Japanese dancers represented Black people. In other words, the impression that real Black dancers gave to Japanese people also made indirectly the representation of Black. Another important phenomenon was the activity of diffusion of US culture by the American Cultural Center in Tokyo. Before the visit of Martha Graham, the center organized the projection of films, Jose Lemon's Othello, and Beth Chanak taught the Graham, Doris Humphrey, and Jose Lemon's methods. She became the head teacher of the School of American Modern Dance that began in 1954. But the dancer, Mori Yoshiko, shared an interesting point with me. In her memory, Beth Chanak also taught the Afro dance with percussion like conga and or bongo. It needs to be researched more deeply, but if it is right, Black culture and its dance were imported very early time into post-war Japan. It is difficult to ignore the blackface, kuronuri, when thinking about the representation of Black people. In the United States, the performance with blackface is taboo because it strongly connects to the minstrel shows, stereotypical and contemptuous expressions. Besides, Japanese people who had not shared this context after the war were not widely concerned with the problem. In this regard, some pieces performed after World War II cannot avoid a criticism, even though the judgment of the performances of another period by the criteria of today is another issue. Let's look at an example. Porgy and Bess was performed before and after World War II, and it was one of the most popular pieces focusing on Black characters. This piece was first performed in 1932 by the company 劇団新劇場. The Shingeki actor and Kabuki actor performed Black characters, even though they had never seen the Black people. At this time, as a strategy of Shingeki, they painted their faces black. It means when they performed white character, they wore blonde wigs and painted their faces white. After World War II, in 1958, the company Gekidan Mingei represented this piece, and the famous actor Takizawa Osamu recalled the use of black makeup. For the dance stage, Kaitani Ballet Company reinterpreted Porgy and Bess by George Gershwin in ballet style in 1955, and the dancers painted their faces black. The painted faces were regarded as a typical way to perform foreigners in those periods, so they did not represent a special prejudice towards Black people. In addition, Kaitani Yaoko did not only imitate the appearance, but she got the suggestion for dance style by Black culture. Her dance was divorced from the glamour of classical ballet, and she lowered her center of gravity, bent her knees, and waved her arms dynamically. Her intention was to study a good sense of rhythm and movement of expression, which are both lacking in us, the classical ballet dancers. And Kaitani also urged the creation of something new by representing a wild instinct and habit of the Negro, Negro no 野生的本能と習性, using techniques based on classic and modern ballet style. Nevertheless, in these terms themselves, Negro no 野生的本能と習性, we recognize a prejudiced attitude toward Black people. Also, in a program of this performance, there are photos of Black painted dancers, but on the back cover, there is an advertisement for whitening cream. In this contrast, we notice the prejudice toward Black people that Japanese people had under consciousness. We must remark again that this doesn't mean Kaitani was a racist, but this shows the general attitude of Japanese people towards Black people in this era. Tokyo Seinen Ballet Dance, Shiku, the prize stock in 1962 also showed this bias and Japanese ambivalent feelings. The original prize stock was written by Oe Kenzaburo in 1958, and it describes an encounter between a Japanese boy and a Black American soldier. The ballet director Komori Yasuo constructed Black scene to represent the social prejudice of adults, and white scene to describe the splendor and free exchange between a Black man and Japanese children. According to Michael Moraski, who analyzed Oe's novel, the Black soldier was described as an ambivalent figure who was worshipped for his body, but who was also compared to an animal, and stereotypical image of Black people. These reflect public sentiment after World War II towards the Black people who came to Japan as part of an occupying army. In short, for Japanese people, Black people were not only discriminated against, but also to be feared, and as pointed out in some articles about Black dancers who had fascinating bodies. In the 1960s, even though the expression with Black faces was still mainstream in stage performance, the dancers overlapped the situation of themselves and the struggle of Black people in the United States or Africa. For example, I Want to Go to Algeria by Group Powwow reflected the situation of the Algerian war and that of Japan, where the opposition movement toward Japan-US security, AMPO, grew stronger. In this piece, mainly composed by Hijikata Tatsumi, the dancers were all painted Black. Here, a representation of Black turned to the reflection of Japanese situation, and Japanese dancers felt a sympathy for the fight of Black people. Fujii Kunihiko's performance, Negro and the River, was inspired by Langston Hughes' poem. Choreographed by Fujii and directed by Ikemiya Nobuo, the piece mainly uses the music of Young Tuxedo Brass Band, which was a large-scale band of Black musicians. In the performance, future Butoh dancers such as Ono Kazuo, Hijikata Tatsumi, Motofuji Akiko, and Ono Yoshito participated. They all painted by Grease and performed Black characters. This piece is composed of 3 acts. The first scene's title is The Memory of the Parade, and they are performed the consciousness of discrimination in a little white girl and the murder of a Black man, which suggests the death of Patrice Lumumba, the leader of Congolese national movement and the first prime minister of the Republic of the Congo. The second act was a field of sugarcane, and it showed a condition that Black people were compelled to work hard for very long hours. The last act, a bus stop, was inspired by the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 and figures the march which continued for 1 year. In a picture of this performance in rehearsal, we can see the dancers who wear open-necked shirts and put on bottles and black turbans. These costumes express the perception of Black people for Japanese people in this period, but their intention was not to perform the movements like the Black people. Fujii wrote as following, quoting the words of Patrice Lumumba. I cut this part. Fujii did not only sympathize with Black people, but he thematized the racial issue existing in Japan, like Black sabetsu, through the representation of Black people. Another example is From There, そこから by Fujii Mieko. Here, Fujii used the gospel of Clara Ward, Mahalia Jackson, and the other songs by Black musicians. Here, she didn't choose the imitation of appearance like blackface, but aimed at a more abstract expression. She also got the inspiration of movement from the black bassist man who visited her studio. Fujii investigated the close connection between music and body. It can be said that this process gave her new grammar to create movements and show the further possibilities of modern dance. Fujii Mieko also paid attention to the social issue like Ampo, and her conscient policy was to perform the figures who resisted the discrimination and oppression. She wrote, "The discriminatory consciousness based on human mind is deep-rooted, and it causes a lot of tragedy all over the world. It's not other people's affairs. We are also responsible." So Fujii not only represents Black people and their problems and expresses the solidarity, but also creates her performances with the fact that she is involved always in mind. As Will Bridge, who analyzed post-war Japanese literature, especially Oe Kenzaburo's novel, points out, 1960s writings aspire to a kind of affinity politics, and the contemporaneity of civil rights, Ampo, and Zengakuren movements sparked an era of rich, authentic trans-Pacific synergy that might be called the golden age of Afro-Japanese exchange. He also insists on an existential analogy between post-war, post-occupation Japanese and civil rights era African American in Oe's writing. In this kind of analogy, dancers described the social issues around them via the representation of Black people, kokujin. As we have analyzed, the representation of Black people reflects the situation of post-war Japan. The effect of US cultural diplomacy gave Japanese people various influences from American culture. There, Japanese dancers who studied modern dance, including Hijikata Tatsumi, paid attention to Black culture. In their representations, we can find their sympathy for Black people, the racial prejudice of Japanese people, and signs of an emerging a new way of dance, etc. We have to reconsider the relationship between Black culture and the Japanese dance scene, which is concealed under the dominant history of modern dance in Japan that focuses on only the connection between Western modern dance and the emergence of Butoh. Finally, I'd like to express gratitude to Konosuke Matsushita Foundation for supporting my research. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Miyagawa-san. Such a rich and very difficult history. Thank you. I've been wondering about this for so long. Okay, moving right along, Ochi Yuma is a senior assistant professor in charge of the Arts Section, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Faculty of Law and Letters at Ehime Daigaku. His area of focus is Japanese contemporary dance, including Butoh, French contemporary dance since the 1990s, especially conceptual dance. And your presentation will be in Japanese, right?
No, I will do it in English.
Oh, you decided, okay, I wasn't sure. But everyone feel free to ask questions, and in our discussion, Japanese or English is fine. Thank you so much. Thank you, Yuma-san. Go ahead.
Thank you for your introducing me. Thank you. I start my presentation. Title is Butoh and the Post-Human Bodies on the cases of Min Tanaka and Komurobushi. One, research objectives. The current study focuses on the similarities between the Japanese avant-garde style of dancing Butoh and the thinking of Michel Foucault, assuming that the inhuman figures presented in Butoh are post-human. The purpose of the study is to clarify that Butoh is a thought process and practice that provides a critical perspective on humanity. In this study, firstly, a focus is placed on Foucault's critical stance on humanities and its proximity to the idea and practice of Tatsumi Hijikata, before subsequently moving to consider the significance of the practice of the second generation of Butoh dancers, Komurobushi and Min Tanaka, disciples of Tatsumi Hijikata. Their practice is considered post-human as defined by Roji Braidotti. 2. The background of the study, the multiplicity and cultural hybridity of Butoh. In this section, I will skip reading my manuscript I have prepared to save time. In a nutshell, what I want to emphasize in this section is that Butoh is a pluralistic phenomenon, and its characteristic is cultural hybridity. For example, as we can see it from the book Butoh-s, edited by Odette Aslan, or some other books, for example here. 3. Research perspectives, criticism of the human and post-human term. The relationship between Butoh and modern French thinking has previously been discussed. But what I want to note here is the commonality and affinity between Michel Foucault's thoughts and Butoh. There has been little hitherto mention of the links between Foucault's thinking and Butoh. In addition, Hijikata himself did not refer to Foucault. However, the research themes of Foucault and the themes of Hijikata show a surprising degree of commonality. Themes common to both are sexuality, crime, illness, and madness. Foucault dealt with these themes in his books, for example, The History of Sexuality, Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison, The Birth of the Clinic, and Madness and Civilization. These writings critically depict the establishment of normativity that creates a partition between heterosexuality and homosexuality, the partition between non-criminals and criminals, the partition between health and illness, and the partition between sanity and madness. Generally speaking, Foucault criticized the concept of modern man consisting of these criterial norms, which is said to have been formed in the 18th century, and the philosophy of subject, which was dominant in Europe from before and after World War II. When we turn our attention to Hijikata, it seems that the Butoh of Hijikata is responding by means of the body to the end of this idea of the modern man and suspending the norms Foucault criticized. Hijikata's Kinjiki, or Forbidden Colors in English, which is said to be the origin of Butoh, was a work on the theme of homosexuality between men, with Hijikata calling his own Butoh criminal dance. He also regarded Nijinsky, who had fallen into madness, as the best Butoh dancer. In his later years, he explored the physical nature of disease through the theme of suijactai, or the emaciated body in English. The themes and times of his choreographic activities overlap almost entirely with the problematic modern systems presented by Foucault. With continuous attempts to invade and overthrow the idea of human subjectivity and rationalities. Hijikata says, dance is a standing corpse putting its life on the line. But for Hijikata, this corpse is located outside of the modern systems, hospitals, schools, prisons, and capitalisms that take hold of our bodies. Thus, the corpse for Hijikata was an important motive for standing outside modern institutions. Roge Braidotti, the author of The Post-Human, sees Foucault's declaration of death of modern man as a trigger for the decline of humanism and post-human term that required a new theory of the subjectivity. Her critical post-humanism attempts to move beyond anthropocentrism and expand the notion of life towards a non-human or the Zoe. In general, as represented by the arguments of Giorgio Agamben, Zoe or their lives projects a negative connotation as something external to the human situation and deprived of humanity. In contrast to this, Braidotti sees positives such as the productive capacity of the Zoe and its cross-species equality. I believe that Braidotti's critical humanism, which moves past the crisis of humanity and turns it into a positive called Zoe, is effective in interpreting the dance of Min Tanaka and Komorobushi, which seems to be more linked to contemporary thought than Hijikata. In the following sections, I'd like to consider the dance of Tanaka and Murobushi, who are attempting to generate change in animal life or going further in abiotic forms, conjunction with this concept of the post-human. It is practice that closes in on a situation that is alien to the human, in which one's body is not a field of expression of the human internal ego or subject to themselves. 4. Min Tanaka, a body like a lost object. Min Tanaka was a dancer who had been greatly influenced by Hijikata since Hijikata's Rebellion on the Body in 1968. Left a great impression on him when he was 23 years old. In 1984, 2 years before Hijikata died, Tanaka danced a piece called The Cornerstone of Romance in the School of Butoh that he asked Hijikata to choreograph. However, Tanaka was not a direct disciple of Hijikata who studied under him and avoided affixing the label of Butoh to his own activities. In fact, Tanaka's activities were different from those of other dancers who were disciples of Hijikata. What I would like to focus on in this presentation is a hyper dance 1,824 hours series that was performed since 1977. Unlike general dancing, Tanaka appears almost naked and is transformed into a being that only has its senses, demonstrating a sensory response to the surrounding environment. In this series, Tanaka danced at about 150 locations across Japan. But what is particularly noteworthy is the dance at Yumenoshima, where his body was thrown like garbage into a large amount of industrial waste. The body as a discarded object appears to abandon the sense of self and the ego, leaving only sensory functions. The body as a sensory object projects all at once the existence of other objects and phenomena around it in interactions with abiotic actors such as the climate and terrain. Shuji Terayama, a contemporary dramatist, described Tanaka's hyperdance as a body like a lost object, and Tanaka's existence, which has mutual relationship with the environment, as de-anthropocentric. In the words of Felix Guattari, who also interacted with Tanaka, it is eco-philosophical. There was also an incident in which Tanaka was arrested by a police officer during a hyperdance on the streets of Ginza. Hijikata, who was asked to comment on this incident by the Mainichi Shimbun, praised Tanaka highly as the most sincere dancer in the modern age. Tanaka's dance as a divergence from legal norms shares traits of Hijikata's idea of criminal dance, and it is also Zoe-like in that the legal rights and human characteristics are removed from the body. It has been told in Tanaka's autobiography and in interviews that when he danced a hyperdance in Paris in 1978, Michel Foucault watched it and he then performed a dance at Foucault's home. Unfortunately, there is no record of the content of this informal meeting, but I do offer the photographs I managed to obtain that provide evidence of the interaction between Tanaka and Foucault. This photograph records the idea of Foucault's human criticism and its affinity with Butoh. In the center of two persons, Foucault and me. 5. Co-Murobushi fears inoperativity. Co-Murobushi, just like Tanaka, was also deeply impacted by viewing the rebellion of the body in 1968, becoming a practitioner of Butoh under the stewardship of Hijikata. However, the uniqueness of Murobushi, which distinguishes him from other dancers, lies in his practice of Shugendo face at the Dewa Sanzan, 3 mountains in Dewa province, where he engaged in Zen contemplation. Regarding the ideal form of Butoh as resembling a Sokushinbutsu, or a monk who practiced austerity to the point of death and was subsequently self-mummified. At almost the exact same time as Min Tanaka was transforming his body into an object. In 1976, Murobushi danced Mami, or Miira in Japanese, as part of a performance called Komso, which refers to a monk of the Fuke school of Zen Buddhism, who wore straw hats on their heads to symbolize the absence of ego. From interviews in his later years, it is understood that Miira is a response to the Hijikata theme of a standing corpse risking its life. Hijikata described Co-Murobushi's Miira as fearless inoperativity, as a dance where nothing is productive. It was an ideal form of dance for Hijikata, who criticized capitalism for managing every aspect of life and turning it into a product. Fearless inoperativity is the highest compliment possible in the way of Hijikata. In this presentation, I would also like to focus on another Murobushi's work called Quicksilver, which is considered an evolutionary form of Miira. The dry and black-skinned body shown to us in Miira and the silver-coated body seen in Quicksilver leave us with completely contrasting impressions. However, for Murobushi, Quicksilver is probably a variation or adaptation of Miira. This reason for this is that both of these representations of bodies involve mercury. The Sokushinbutsu process in Japan was successful only in areas with high mercury content because mercury was effective in preventing body decomposition. Murobushi was also aware of the historical fact that mercury was both a poison and a drug, and the historical practice of it being used in alchemy in both East and West. In short, he recognized that mercury is a medium that transforms the body and matter. The dance critic Keisuke Sakurai found a similar relationship between the fluidity of mercury and Murobuchi's dancing in Quicksilver, stating, "It is neither solid nor liquid, but quickly changes appearance at every moment, embodying the so-called form Murobuchi's dance." However, it is further worth noting in this work that the dance of Murobuchi, which is likened to mercury, seems to be even further removed from the human than Mira, seeming to reach an inorganic and neutral material dimension. It presents us with a body that deserved to be called a body without organs, or just a post-human. Murobuchi himself states the following: "Me, myself, as a human must perish. The human body must perish, too, in order to recapture the unknown, a shining dark body, which has not yet belonged to anyone, but continues to belong to everyone." 6. Conclusion. Butoh and the post-human. The Butoh of Tanaka and Murobuchi in the context of alienation of modern human beings who are incorporated into various systems is prepared to renounce human rights and abandon the subject, progressing to attempt to become Zoe, their lives, or corpses. Furthermore, they even try to become a non-human object. Tanaka threw his body onto the street as an object, moving outside of the law. Murobuchi developed Hijikata's motif of the corpse. One point worthy of attention within their practice of Butoh is that a clear mind does not control the body, and the expression of the internal ego does not appear in the body, but rather the body is a medium for what comes from outside the subject. Finally, I'd like to try to draw positive conclusion from the post-human phenomena they embody. That is, I want to consider the reason why we assemble to stare at their heterogeneous bodies. Tanaka emphasizes the sense of interconnection between the self and others, including the non-human and the global environment, and presents a vision of an eco-philosophical community as a relational subject that transcends the self. Murobuchi strongly reminds us that our bodies are a vessel of death and are in a continuous process of dying and disappearing. Both Tanaka and Murobuchi embodies highly abstract concept of the human death in their own ways. We may be attracted to the human death within them, just as Sokushinbutsu still attracts people. And also, their bodies seem to embody Alfonso Linguist's theory of a community of death, namely the community of those who have nothing in common, that moved beyond the economic interests or productive capacity of the body, and understood death as a catalyst for the creation of solidarity with others. In other words, both Tanaka and Murobuchi break away from the traditional domain of the modern independent subject, transitioning to the new domain of relational subject. Their post-human bodies, as it relates to bonds with others, has the potential to transcend racial, gender, and economic interests to reorganize pan-human relationships and communities. Thank you for your attention.
Wow, thank you so much. So now we're going to, oh, that's beautiful. I wish all of us could share all these different sources. It's been such a rich journey through all your papers. So we're going to go right to questions. I just want to mention a few terms and ways of thinking very, very quickly across the papers. And I wondered how these terms might have start in one paper and move across. The chromatization, the idea of color being in some ways materiality and a subject, and how when we move to Miyagawa-san's paper, how it becomes even more politicized in terms of what blackness is across from both ideas of race, but also ideas of how the skin becomes this materiality, how it becomes both a barrier and also something that's transparent, but having multiple meanings. And then when we move on to Ochi-san's, I'm just so struck. I'm a Rosie Braidotti fan, but I am really struck by how, and this is what I always wonder about this relationship, and many people have written about this across the French philosophers working with these Japanese bodies, not just their writing, but in some ways the embodiment of those thoughts in action. But then your last question, I mean, I would love for all of us to take off, is why we look at these heterogeneous bodies. That's so beautiful. So
Thank you.
I would like if people would turn themselves on and raise their hand if they have a direct question. Otherwise, I would like to go to, as soon as you do that, I'll pick you up. So Caitlin, do you have one? Okay.
I do. I have two.
Hello,
but they're
we're limited in time, so
just
go for it.
they're very simple. They're not abstract, so I apologize because it won't really lead to very deep conversation. But I want to know first about Kimpun, this golden powdered show. Has anyone heard anything about like where that came from? Because it probably came before during post-war. Yes, sorry.
Bruce Batts wrote that it comes from Goldfinger 007.
Yes,
maybe.
Yeah. I mean,
so there are several influences, I think, in the dancing through the film, the movies, coming from the United States and so on. So I think that's also an important part to analyze. But I think it's quite possible that the Kimpun may have been enforced by this film. But at the same time, I think the coloring the body is something always existed in Japanese tradition. So and we know that in Butoh you can color your body also blue, as Dairakudakan does. So it's not important maybe what color you choose, and the Kimpun is really attractive, I think.
There's something chrome about and glittery too.
Yes,
really
the muscles you can see the anatomy of the body in a very, that's very attractive. Yes, Kimpun is attractive.
Caitlin, go ahead. You're number two.
Okay, number two. So also talking about kuronuri. And I'm really interested in Japan today when, like on TV, there's a comedian called Hamada in downtown, and he did kuronuri to actually pretend to be a black man, and there was a lot of criticism about that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of problems in Japan about what is kuronuri, what is blackface, and how do people deal with this? Because I don't want to get too much into it. But as academics who have given this deep thought, do you have any answers about how artists today should approach painting colors, like places to be careful or things they should be considered about, or rather not, or just whatever, like do what you do? Like, I don't know, what would you advise about that? I know it's not your place to advise. But
yeah, Miyagawa.
What do you think about that?
approach that?
Maybe may I speak in Japanese? It's a little
go
bit
ahead.
difficult. 黒塗りで私もちょっと発表の中ではあんまり言及できなかったんですけど、多分これ今でも普通にやって、そのダウンタウンの浜田さんとかたびたび問題になっていることで、多分日本人の中ではやっぱりそのブラックフェイスが差別的だっていう表現の認識が一部の人はもちろんあるけれども、それがこう広い共通認識にはあんまりまだなってないような部分もあったりするかなと思うんですね。で、じゃあアーティストがその黒塗りにするときにどういうことを考えるべきかっていうのはちょっと私も何とも言えないところではあるんですけれども、やっぱりその日本での文脈、特にその進撃の中でやっぱり白人なら白く塗るし、黒人なら黒く塗るしっていうその意識がずっと続いてきたっていうところが、ちょっとアメリカと違う文脈がだいぶあるのかなというふうに思います。なんかあんまり答えになってなかったらごめんなさい。
全然十分。Thank you so much. It was good to hear your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, cool. Okay. If you, Caitlin, I'm sure you have more questions like me, but let's see if there's anyone else. Anyone else? Please raise your hand and light yourself up. Do you want me to put someone on the spot? Anyone across? Okay. Miyagawa-san or Ochi-san, if you would have a question to each other, or Katja, because you are so many of your areas of research and argument crossed over in like with some tensions, but also like other strands of very like ideas. So do you have things you want to ask each other? Yes, please.
May I?
Go ahead. Dive in.
The first question is this is a personal curiosity. I always wondered to Miyagawa-san and 日本語でご返事していただいても大丈夫ですので。In 1955, the Martha Graham Company performed in Japan. You said that, and I always wondered, why is the Martha Graham method not so strong in Japan, or is it something that I misunderstood? I never crossed Martha Graham's technique in Japan in a consistent way. Consistent way.
I think that before World War II, there was a mainstream of German expressionist dance in Japan, of course.
It still is.
And after the war, this tradition continued in Japan. And I think that Martha Graham method is become more popular for the modern dancers, not for something like Butoh dancers. But I think some dancers also practice Martha Graham method, and someone go to New York or anything else to study her method.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I took a lot of modern and contemporary classes in Tokyo this is the 90s, and in 1985, 1 or 2, but it was very strong of the modern dancers. But it was interesting then to go and take a class with I forget who I was studying with, but even Ono-san, you know, when you do the float on the floor, you know, with your feet and your hands. I mean, to me, it was like, you know, pure hijikata mixed with Martha Graham, because you had to have such abdominal strength. And it always came from the center. It always was very low, you know, in the body. So it's very interesting, but there's still a lot. If you take contemporary dance, the floor work is a lot of it's based in on Graham technique, but Graham technique has also changed. So
Yes, but maybe the point of the center of our body and so on, it has been taken by Martha Graham from the Indian, let's say, Indian tradition, for example, the Eastern tradition. So that's a crossing, the strange crossing between avant-garde, modernity, and so on. But as I also attended classes by contemporary dancers in Japan and so on, or even watching performances of modern dance, it was for me always like I never, maybe I missed the right the right sections probably, but I felt a great loss, a great lack of Graham's presence in Japan in several areas. Yeah. Because in Italy, for example, it's very strong. Graham's influence in Europe is incredibly strong. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Ochi-san, you want to?
Connecting to this point to my presentation, Min Tanaka was a modern dancer until 1964. Because American postmodern dance is educated in the universities. For example, Tsukuba University for educational university. When Tanaka was a student, teacher, her name is Chioe Matsumoto, was a specialist American modern dance. She was the teacher of Tsukuba University. So Min was also modern dancer.
And now I remember even Carlotta Ikeda was a Martha Graham. She was educated in modern dance and Martha Graham technique. So, but there is something I don't know why I cannot distinguish the Graham technique in its evolution, maybe in other dance forms. I don't know why I have this problem. Sorry.
And I have a question.
Please. Yes.
Maybe Katia or Miyagawa-san know. Kazuo Ono participated in the workshop of modern dance workshop organized by American Cultural Center. I heard a little that fact.
I think he participated in, but I can't find the trace. Or, in fact, this modern dance school is rest very few materials. So now I'm researching about this.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So, Ochi-san, I'm curious with the theories that you brought up, particularly the Rosie Braidotti and then Foucault, and in your own way, rather than just in a sense academically seeing how there was a kind of, if not influence, and infiltration of French theory into the sort of physical practices and thinking during the Hijikata era, I guess. What did you discover or feel that there's something that hasn't been explained yet, or what limitations might be from the Japanese side or French? Because I'm a big doubter, you know. Yeah.
In my knowledge, Butoh and relationship between Butoh and French contemporary thought. Uno Kuniichi is an important person because maybe you know, Uno was a student of Gilles Deleuze, University of Paris, and he wrote a doctor's thesis about Antonin Artaud. And so he came back to, when he came back to Japan, he had connection with Hijikata, and Hijikata asked about Artaud to Mr. Uno, Uno sensei. And Uno introduced the about thought about alto via Gildrus. That is an important thing, I think. However, I don't know enough the influence of Rosie Braidotti's theory. I don't discover now.
No, but those are your thoughts to bring that together, which I thought was very brilliant. So in these sort of filterings, right? And all of you brought up, Miyagawa-san, you too, how you bring up, there's the Black performers from, you know, teaching the dancers something, or Katja, you know, that Ko performed all these places in the world. And I'm curious about that transference when you're in a place and, or you meet another cultural, in a sense, context. Have you thought about what happens to the dance? Not from the point of view of the performer, possibly, although that's hard to tell, but from watching it, what, and maybe seeing it on video, if the person's not here anymore, you know, I'm curious what you see. What are those transfers? For example, Miyagawa-san, when you had the photograph of one of the Black dancers and they had kind of had their butt out and their arms out, it was so much like from early soft shoe or tap in the circuitry, you know, the early 20th century, when African American performers and also white performers were doing blackface. Okay, so, but I'm curious what you see, you know, what is that transfer? You know, you can say there's the politics of it and this is what they did, but what do you see? I mean, how do you like confront that or provoke it to have the bodies deal directly with the corporeal politics? Yeah.
So it's very difficult question to answer for me.
I'm sorry. Yeah. 日本語すみません。ちょっと複雑からごめんなさい。
But it's also difficult to speak in Japanese too.
Okay. Sorry.
So,
Bocchi, do you have an or Katja?
Yeah. Catherine, I wanted to, first of all, to connect Ochi's comment on Ochi's talk and what he said and what you asked him, referring to Braidotti and so on. And I think that will be a part of the answer to your question.
Yeah.
And I would like to emphasize that I refer to Deleuze in case of Murobushi only because Murobushi draws on Deleuze. I would never refer to Deleuze in reference to Hijikata, not because Hijikata does not refer to Deleuze, but because nobody is, nobody, I don't know if somebody is reflecting on the fact that Deleuze integrated and re-elaborated and the reception of, for example, Buddhism in Deleuze and how he created his wonderful thought. It's a wonderful thought, which sounds completely, perfectly adaptable to, for example, the corporeality in Butoh, if you want. And that's why Murobushi read himself. It's not that he was only inspired, for example, by Foucault. He anticipated Foucault, and then he read himself in the words of Foucault. Yeah. And I can understand this very well. The problem is, and that's what I think I discussed with him also very often, with Murobushi very often, is why nobody was criticizing Foucault in confronting, as you say, with Japanese culture in a certain way, or these bodies in Japanese culture. And first of all, and this is my ritournelle in this case, if we start from the conceptions of corporeality in Japanese culture or in performance with all those terms of bodies. And if we see Hijikata, how many bodies he analyzes or decomposes in a certain way, how can you confront this with Foucault's or Merleau-Ponty or Deleuze thought?
Yeah.
Even if Deleuze creates this body without organs, it's fantastic. You read it and it seems Butoh. I know that. And Uno, okay. Anyway, Uno encountered Hijikata in the early 80s. It's not that Hijikata was inspired by Artaud and so a lot of myths, I think, are created around corporeality and how. So we have to pay very much attention of what we intend by, but what we mean by bodies or. Sorry, this is
and that. But that's excellent. What you did is you flipped it. What was the encounter of the Japanese to that, as opposed to thinking of the other, which is, so much that
it's the fascination. For example, Murubushi was too fascinated with the Western thought and Western philosophy, and I can understand that. But he was not critically engaged in understanding how to, and that he read translations of those thoughts, for example. So it's a complex. I think this should be analyzed in a critical way, much better.
Yeah, we should all take that up. I absolutely agree. Yeah. You guys, it's time, right? Am I right? Yeah, 2:45.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the morning for me. 2 a.m., 2:45 a.m. But for you, it's 6:45 in the evening. And our next session, which is our gathering session, our closing session, I would like to invite everyone to. I do want to give a big applause. Everybody put their hands up for this marvelous panel that opened up more questions, which is what research is, right? More questions and more bodies.
Oh, Corey.
I hope we can gather again someday. You guys are just absolutely brilliant. Thank you. And everyone take very special care of their health. And thank you all so much.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Anne.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Great panel. I learned a lot. And I'm more curious than ever.
I didn't talk about Gunji Masakatsu, unfortunately, but okay.
I know, but I mean,
sorry.
this would have been a lecture on its own. You can do a lecture on its own.
There was no time. I'm sorry, Anne.
Yeah, he was my teacher too. Yeah.
Oh God. Fantastic.
And Anna and I are the gods, right?
No,
yes,
definitely not. Okay, thank you
so
much.
Helen. Ciao, Helen.
Hope to see you all in half an hour at our last
now at 12, 12:30? No, half past,
yeah, it should be half past. Just a second.
19:30.
19:30, so half past 12.
Okay, 19:30, half past 12.
So
thank you.
Roughly 40 minutes.
Miyagawa, Ochi-san, and Katja, please stay in contact, because I think you should really try to publish some of these. And they have this idea of the colors, and we would definitely involve Kosuge-san. Okay, and it would be beautiful to work with you. There's so much going on here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. See you later.
なんかカティアさんが最後に話したことをちょっともう一回話し合いたいですね。
すみませんね。私もおうちさんと長く話したいんですよ。こ
の後なんか集まりがあるんですか。すみません。よくわかんない。
いやこの後最後のパネルがありますね。
最後のパネルで必ずぜひ参加してください。
わかりました。はい。
そして Did you see the comment of Gabriella? Thank you very much for your divine presentation. This was my first time learning about Butoh, and I really enjoyed it. I think I'm going to research it more on my own. Very glad. Isn't that
we
great?
have a new victim, and Helen was also with us. Helen Parker. That's great.
Yeah. She was there.
Fantastic.
And Caitlin.
So I think we have to close this session. due to technical.
わかりました。後ほど
Okay,
ね。
so
は
see you
い。
in 40 minutes. 50分後に最後のパネル、
はい
ぜひまたお集まりください。
ありがとうございます。どうもお疲れ様
お疲れ
です。
様でし
では
た。
後ほど。
あー
どうも。